Okay, it is recording and I'm going to hit start webinar, which means attendees will start joining in.
Am I looking straight into the camera or am I to the side?
Looks like you're looking straight.
Okay, great. I know there's only a couple people. Nice. We have people starting to come in. You all are the people that showed up early for class, I can tell. Oh, Miles, I haven't seen you in a while. Welcome, welcome. All right. They'll give us a few, if the panelists don't mind. I see folks are coming in, so we'll just, once it gets to a critical number, then we'll get started. Nice, very good. Can act like a public radio host and say, I get 4 more attendees, I'll get started. All right, everyone, we're just a minute after. We're just going to give it another minute to make sure we get as many people as possible. We've had over 60 people register for this. There's a lot of interest, so that's very exciting. And I already know that our neighbors are so interested in this topic. So I'm so glad you're all here. Yeah, I think we're okay. Just a few more minutes. This would be, if we were in person, this would be the part where you're milling about. Maybe we have some coffee, some healthy treats for everyone, some not so healthy treats. Great, great. Almost there. Oh, that's another one. Here we go. 2 more. Okay, 1 more. Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll just be 1 more minute, then we'll get started. Okay, Savitra, so I'll say let's get started and we'll get going. And we're already doing better. Sometimes only 10% of the people who register show up. So we have surpassed that. Well, we've surpassed that. Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to our community conversation. First, I want to do an overview of the program. Oh, I'm State Senator Mary Washington, honored to represent the 43rd Legislative District and to be a member of the Senate of Maryland. We're just going to overview the program. Today, first, we're having our welcoming and just a framing of the issue around dollar stores. And then we're going to have two great presentations, one by Councilor Vanessa Hall-Harper. She's a city councilwoman at Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Kennedy Smith. She's a senior researcher at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. Then we're going to have a discussion and Q&A. And then we're going to summarize a little about what we've learned. I am an educator, so I wanted to make sure that there are some main points that we hit, and then talk about or just share what some next steps would be. There's absolutely a large amount of time for people to ask questions. So this isn't going to be a 5-minute, there'll be a full 20 to 25 minutes for questions. As you probably know, part of the framing around this is that dollar stores are a billion-dollar industry, and their popularity is rising and new stores are popping up every day. Dollar General has opened stores at a rate of almost 3 a day. What we call these dollar stores, but we also can refer to them as small box discount retailers. That's to distinguish them from the Walmarts, the large box or the big box discount retailers. And they're aimed at providing basic goods at basic prices. But there's growing evidence that the cost of dollar stores, aggressive pricing, and their targeting in active and emerging commercial districts can drive local grocery and retail stores and possibly out of business and possibly depress property values. So a small box discount store is Dollar General, Dollar Tree, Family Dollar, which interestingly is owned by Dollar Tree. It was acquired a few years ago. And we're not just talking about having one or two Dollar Trees here and there. So we're not saying that this is happening within a 3 or 4 mile radius. In fact, when we look at our own area of Baltimore, there are between Greenmount York Road, okay, and the Alameda, right? So between Greenmount, right? So Greenmount starting at North Avenue, going all the way up to Northern Parkway, and then over to the Alameda and back down, there are 11 stores, Dollar Trees, Family Dollars, and Dollar Generals. And in fact, there's a 12th Dollar General proposed for 32nd and Greenmount to replace the Rite Aid. Now, if you notice, which if you look at the screen here, we're showing you that the concentration is just very unusual and quite stark. If you go from if you go just between 25th and 33rd Street, there are 3 Dollar Generals. So the question is that I had, and I almost titled this learning session, Too Much of a Cheap Thing. Is it possible to have too much of a cheap thing? Are small box discount stores good for our neighborhoods? Now, the reason I wanted to have this webinar is actually, I've been paying attention to this for a while, but something struck me about 3 years ago when I went to visit my great-grandmother's hometown in Lakeview, South Carolina. Okay, and that's where my mother was born, is where my grandmother was born, and we used to go there in the summers. And I had been there as recently as maybe 10 years ago. And there was a downtown post office, there were stores, and I just remember there was a lot of activity. And the town has less than 1,000 people. Okay, so this is really a small southern town. So 3 years ago, I went, and this was one of those places where you'd ask, well, where does my great grandmother live? And my grandmother said, just go to the middle of town and ask someone. Well, 3 years ago, because I had sort of forgotten, I got to the middle of town, and the only thing that was left in town was a Dollar General and a struggling grocery store across the street, and oddly, a kite store. So I was like, wow. So my interest is both as a member of this community in the Maryland Senate. It's not really to go back to some kind of nostalgic desire to return to the way things were. My dad used to say that some of the good old days weren't so good. So things do change, right? But this is truly a question for today of asking ourselves about the future and what we want for ourselves and for our children. And what do we as a community intend to do about making sure that we have the future that we want for ourselves and our children? Now, in this community, and as your representative, we've really focused on education, and we focus on public safety. We want to keep our community safe, and we want to make sure our children are well educated. And we even make sure and we focus on the environment, so the air is clean and that there are plenty of trees and grass and play spaces. But one of the areas that I know that some of you have been fighting for, and I absolutely know you're fighting for a lot, is that economic development, that piece, right? How do we create an environment that is both socially and emotionally healthy, but also is economically healthy? So our question today is, and it's on the screen, is how do we sustain and attract locally owned retail, high quality grocery stores, which enhance our community vitality, recognize our neighborhood identity, that there's a diversity of consumer goods, and that it improves the access to healthy and affordable foods. These are values that I know all of you share. So to begin this discussion, let's first have some housekeeping, some logistics. I'm going to remind you that you're muted. If you have any questions, your questions can be entertained in the chat. During the question and answer portion, that's when we'll entertain the questions, but please feel free to put them in the chat. There's also a Q&A section so that possibly the panelists or someone else can give you an answer directly and not on screen. I want to share the reminder that our conversation is being recorded so that we can share it with you afterward, and we hope that you share it with others. I understand we have a number of people, and I want to make sure we're up to 30 attendees. And I want to recognize that I have some of my colleagues are here. I want to recognize that we have some community leaders that are here. We have Bridget Neal, Andy Winder, Carol Rice, Diana Emerson, who leads our Waverly Main Street, Donna Blackwell, a number. Kelly Cross, is good to see you, Logan Endow, Nick Sheridan, it's great to see you, Paula Provence, Sonia Merchant-Jones, Winifred. There's so many of you that are here. I can't go through the whole list, but it's just exciting to see you all again. So first, we're going to show a short clip from Fort Worth, Texas, from Councilwoman Kelly Allen Gray, and that'll set the stage. Savitra.
In 2019, the residents of Fort Worth, Texas fought back against an unwelcome invasion of their community.
A few years ago, we noticed that dollar stores had really just started popping up in close proximity to each other all across East Fort Worth and Southeast Fort Worth. We discovered that west of Interstate 35, there's probably only maybe 30 dollar type stores. And then east and southeast of Interstate 35, there are almost 100 dollar type stores. And they are in close proximity to each other where they may be a half a mile apart, no more than a mile apart. East and Southeast Fort Worth is a majority minority section of the city. Economics, very diverse. Racially, very diverse. Ethnically, very diverse. And when you look at the sheer size of the city of Fort Worth, one entire side of town is purposely being left out of that economic advantage.
So thank you. I had a great conversation last week with the former councilwoman. She's now moved on and she's doing other things, but still focused on ensuring that her community is economically vital. So we have two panelists today that have direct experience in this area and can offer the position from being in the in a community that is directly impacted, and also a researcher. So first, Councilwoman Vanessa Hall-Harper. She is a Tulsa native. She earned her Bachelor's of Arts degree in political science and pre-law. She also has done paralegal studies. She earned her Master's of Science in Management degree. And she is also a political science adjunct professor at Tulsa Community College. She's a community activist who is passionate about uplifting her community. She volunteers and serves on a plethora of boards and committees, such as the City of Tulsa's Sales Tax Overview Committee. So that means she's a quantitative nerd like me. I like that. The Institute for Developing Communities, Black Wall Street Chamber of Commerce. The councilwoman represents the area known as is the Greenwood area, but it's also known as Black Wall Street. The Power Group Community Development Corporation and the historic Greenwood District Main Street Board. Kennedy Smith joins us also. Ms. Smith is a senior researcher for the Institute of Self-Reliance's Independent Business Initiative. Her work focuses on analyzing the factors that threaten small businesses and on developing program and policy tools that communities like us, like you, can use to level the playing field for small businesses, small independent businesses, and help to build thriving economies. Her work builds on her years of on-the-ground experience helping towns and cities throughout North America build vibrant downtowns and neighborhood commercial centers. She's actually spent 14 years as the director of the National Main Street Center and as a principal at the Community Land Use and Economic Development Group. She's honored. She was honored as one of the 100 most influential urbanists of all time. Wow. So really honored so much for the two of you to spend your time with us today. So Councilor, please start us off and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. I love speaking about this topic because again, this is an issue that's, as your point, sweeping through this country, and it must be addressed. And so I do represent District 1 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, primarily a Black, brown, and poor community. But we do have, some very well off and some that are not so well off. And so addressing economics in that regard is definitely key and important. Just like in the video, the fact that these stores are proliferating certain communities and not, or avoiding certain communities, is not by accident. This is, in my mind, it is a market strategy that the dollar stores are using. And they do come into those communities who I believe historically are not able to speak for themselves or have representations that addresses the issues that they are faced with. For me, my entire district of 9, Tulsa is divided into 9 districts. My entire district was a food desert, and I ran on a platform of addressing food insecurity in my community. And so that's, why I started down this road. And it came to a point where every time I saw development or dirt being turned, thinking, oh, okay, well, I wonder what that's going to be, right? We got some development taking place. It was always a dollar store. And I'm like, what is going on? And back then, it just was not a lot of information like there is now on this issue. And so again, this was around 2017. And so I started thinking about what can we do policy-wise from a policy perspective to address this issue? Because if we don't address it in policy, it's not going to be addressed. And so I started doing research, and I came upon the Institute for Local Self-Reliance and got a lot of information on research from their website and learned that they are another city in California approached an issue not related to dollar stores, but it was related to businesses, in that they enacted policy or an ordinance in their community that there would never be in any particular time more than 10 national chain stores in that store. So that was the commitment that they had to the small retailer, to the mom and pop stores, that in that community, there would never be more than 10 national retailers at any given time. So the Home Depots, the Lowe's, the national brands that we are familiar with. And so I said, I wonder if they could do that to address and to really respect and honor and make sure that their local businesses survive. Why can't I do something like that similarly, but addressing a health problem? Because food insecurity clearly is a health issue. In our community, a study was done back in around 2014 that showed that there was a 14-year life expectancy gap between North Tulsa, which is the community that I represent, and South Tulsa, which is the white affluent community. 14-year life expectancy gap. And then they started obviously looking at the social determinants of health. What existed in one community that did not exist in the other? And so obviously food insecurity and access to healthy foods, access to healthcare, all of those things that we know. But it was based solely on your zip code, where you lived, where you were born and raised. And so again, to me, in my experience, I think policy was the best way to address that. And so I started doing the investigation, trying to figure out how can we address this. Zoning was key. In order to develop, to build a store, to get a business permit, to get an occupancy permit, all of those things run through your local government. And so I started asking questions about what kind of policies can we put into place to ensure that these stores are not allowed to proliferate a community. I've said it from the beginning, even though I think some people don't believe me. I am not against dollar stores. I've never been against dollar stores. And I do shop from time to time in dollar stores. But if they're allowed to proliferate certain communities, that's the only store you will ever be able to go into, because they run every other business out. And so I wanted a balance. And so that's why I approached this from a policy perspective. And so I was requesting that a moratorium be put in place, that no other dollar stores would receive building permits, at least for this 6-month period. The moratorium was for 6 months, until we can figure out how we were going to address this issue. And the way we did that, or how we addressed the issue, was through what we coined a healthy neighborhoods overlay. It was an overlay, and that's a term used in zoning that you'll find in any community, any government, that in certain areas of the community, because this is not a citywide, this was just for my district, because it was my district that was adversely impacted with these dollar stores the most. And so the Healthy Neighborhoods Overlay put restrictions in place. It said that you can't build another dollar store within a mile of another dollar store, or an existing dollar store. I wanted about 2 miles, but we had to negotiate, and we settled on a 1 mile radius that you could not build another store. We also did and put into that policy some incentivizing mechanisms for grocery stores, to say, if you came to this community, because it is a food desert, then you can, you chose to develop, we reduced the parking lot, right? Which is a huge expense in any development. We reduced the size of the parking lot. So we were trying to look at ways to incentivize healthy food options at the same time, not just restriction, but what kind of carrots can we put into the policy to address the food insecurity. I'm happy to say that we opened our first grocery store. My district was without a grocery store for about 17 years. And we opened that store in May, this past May, and it is doing very well. I am hoping that some nearby dollar stores close because the grocery store is there and there are healthy food options. Hadn't been open that long, so I'm hoping that that's the case. Every time I drive by a store, I'm looking at the parking lots to see how many cars are in there, hoping that their sales go down, and those that are near the grocery store would close, because they do have an impact. They do have a negative impact on grocery stores. As we were going through this battle, a lot of communities were calling when it got on the news, because it made national news, this fight several times. And so communities at that time was just reaching out, and I've directed them to the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, because they were tracking this entire process from the very beginning and throughout. And community, I even had a reporter call me from Greenland or somewhere, and they did a story, and it was in Dutch. He sent me the paper. I couldn't read anything, but it is an international problem, in fact. And so the reality is, in my opinion, although I am not against dollar stores, their market and their strategy, their market strategy is not in consideration, in my opinion, of healthy outcomes in neighborhoods or healthy neighborhoods. It's about profit. And as long as it pays, then their model is to put profits over people. And that's where I believe, as elected officials, have to step in and say, wait, this is too much, right? We're going to push the pause button on this. We have to make sure our communities are balanced as far as economics are concerned, but more importantly, that there are healthy options for everyone living in a city, in a town, and not just the affluent communities that can afford to go into the more expensive grocery stores, or that just don't have any options, right? A lot of people in my community, and it angers me when I saw it, that I would see people walking down the street with 5 bags in each hand of groceries, and they were coming from a dollar store, because I knew there wasn't anything healthy. It was clear that that's the only option that they had of places to go to shop, but knowing of their products, that those products are not healthy for their families. And so I was intent on addressing that for the citizens in my community, and to say no more. We have the one store, I need about 4. So we are still working to enhance, to incentivize, and to make sure we have more stores coming to my community. The way the city of Tulsa is divided up, there's 9 districts, and there's about 45,000 people in each district. That's how we set the boundaries. And so that means that there's a huge segment of a community that don't have access. And I believe that with access, people can live healthier lives and have healthier options for their families. And so that's kind of my story in a nutshell. The aftermath, we're still in it. We're still trying to see. I do know that every time I go into the grocery store, I have a hard time finding produce. And that is because people are buying it. And so when I see that, I'm not angry. I'm like, yes, the options are there. Because there were those that came against. I'll be just perfectly honest with you. The regional chamber here, which is a very, very strong business representative, they say they represent the interests of retailers and businesses, came out against me. I will say that 2 other councilors on the council, where their entire district was not a food desert like mine, but they did have pockets of food deserts, wanted to address this issue with me. But when those calls came from the power structure and people in power, they backed away and said they were not going to move forward with it. And I said, well, I am. I didn't get into this to be told what to do by people in power and institutions in power. And so I will say that definitely be prepared for that. But don't let that deter you, because as far as I'm concerned, it's about the people and not profits, and not those who are only concerned about profits that can be made, as opposed to healthy communities and healthy people. And so I would say definitely be prepared for that. I even met some pushback within City Hall. And I had to engage with the mayor to say, look, I need some help from the legal department. I need some help from the planning department. And they're just pushing me off. And so he was able, because we have a strong mayor form of government. And so city council cannot go to a department head and give a directive. That has to come from the mayor. And so I had to seek his support. And thankfully he did. He supported this issue. He said, this is an issue that she's experiencing in her community, and it is our job to help with that issue. And so got a lot of pushback, I will say. The planning commission, I had a man on the planning commission take a picture of me. It was in the newspaper, laminated and held it up in the planning commission, because our planning commission, our meetings are televised, and said, this woman right here. I mean, and just, he didn't even realize I was in the audience. I'm sitting there looking at him. But while he was doing this, but was just trying to discredit. It was an attempt to discredit me, who I represented, which everyone knows in Tulsa is primarily the most disenfranchised of our community. and just tried to blast me as trying to do something that was stupid. I was called flat out stupid on conservative radio stations here. So I will say, be prepared for that, but don't let it deter you, because if you are fighting for your people, your community, then you can't lose, as far as I'm concerned. And so anything that I went through was well worth it. And when we opened that first grocery store, it was a joyous occasion.
Absolutely. Oh, that's great. And great way to transition into, and we'll have questions, because I have questions, and we'll continue this. But Ms. Smith, could you start? And I think you have a presentation, so
I do, yeah. I'll let me get it up here on the screen.
Yes.
There we go.
And
all right. Well, thank you, Senator, for inviting me to be here today. And I am thrilled to be on this panel with Vanessa Hall-Harper. You are a rock star at ILSR. And now I know who the person is who's sending all those calls to me. I did send that reporter from Denmark to you, by the way. That was me doing that. Yeah, your work there is really inspiring, and we tell your story all the time to communities across the country to inspire them to, to do the right thing too. As the senator said, I work for the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, which is a national nonprofit organization that helps communities build strong, resilient economies by challenging corporate concentration and creating community-scaled and locally driven economic development strategies. And a growing part of my work these days involves helping communities that are challenging the proliferation of dollar stores. I wanted to start by backing up and taking a look at the big picture for a second. America has had antitrust laws in place for over 100 years now. They were originally developed because of concentration in industries like shipping and steel and oil. And until the 1980s, they did their job, which was to prevent a single company from monopolizing an entire industry or category and choking out competition. Competition between businesses is absolutely essential for innovation and for equitable economic growth. Then in the late 1970s, early 1980s, largely as a result of a book written by Robert Bork, as you might remember his Supreme Court battle way back, called The Antitrust Paradox, Congress and the White House shifted their interpretation of antitrust laws to the so-called consumer welfare standard, which focuses on the effects of business practices on consumers rather than their effects on competitors. In essence, making sure that customers got the lowest price, regardless of how it happened. In the retail sector, this opened the door for the explosive growth of retailers like Walmart, who use their enormous market power to squeeze their suppliers on price and sales terms. And they use loss leaders to force competitors out of business, basically offering a product at below cost in order to bring in customers and hurt their competitors. With big box retailers like Walmart soaking up so much of the market in the 1980s and 1990s, it was almost inevitable that somebody was going to come along to absorb sales at a smaller level, and that's exactly what dollar stores do. As the senator mentioned earlier, there are now 34,000 dollar stores in the US. That's more than all the McDonald's, Starbucks, and Walmarts in the country combined. Two dollar store chains, Dollar General and the combined Dollar Tree Family Dollar, which are one company now, account for almost all of them, 32,000 of the 34,000. 75% of the US population lives within 5 miles of a Dollar General alone. And Dollar General, as the senator pointed out, plans to open 1,100 new stores this year, and it's expanding abroad. It did $33.7 billion in sales in 2021. They keep their expenses as low as possible. They rent inexpensive buildings, and they keep staff costs low by keeping their stores very thinly staffed. In urban areas, as we've pointed out, they tend to locate in moderate income neighborhoods and in neighborhoods that are predominantly Black and brown. And I'm going to talk about what that means in Baltimore in a little bit. There are lots of problems. They absorb sales that would otherwise go to other businesses, particularly locally owned businesses. And it doesn't have to be a store that sells exactly the same stuff they do. They can siphon off just a small percentage of sales that might otherwise go to a bookstore or a hardware store. And that puts those small businesses at risk because their profit margins are relatively thin. They extract money from community. Oh, here's dollar store growth. My slide's out of place there. They extract money from communities. Money that could build local wealth goes instead to corporate shareholders and investors. When a business is locally owned, the profits that business owner makes get reinvested in the community. They support community institutions. They shop at local stores. When you're shopping at a chain store, that money goes out of the community immediately and goes into the pockets of shareholders and investors. They create food deserts. People often say that they locate in food deserts. They actually also create food deserts by blocking opportunities for healthy food stores to come in. They're vulnerable to crime because they're so thinly staffed. It's almost impossible for staff to staff a cash register and also restock things at the same time. And so they're very vulnerable to robberies and armed robberies and violence. I've had a couple of people talk to me and describe them as three-dimensional ATMs. You can just walk in and get cash out of them. They have very poor labor practices. They work people hard. They don't pay much. They give poor benefits, which is why we've seen this rash of dollar store staff quitting en masse in the past year. They have a tendency to promote people to assistant manager positions relatively early, and assistant managers and managers are exempt from overtime. So they don't earn overtime and they work long hours. They cause traffic and pedestrian safety problems. And there's a host of other things that they do too, including driving down the value of adjacent and nearby properties, causing light pollution, water runoff problems, all kinds of problems like that. As you know, Tulsa was one of the pioneers in enacting a dispersal ordinance, and there were several other cities like Birmingham and Mesquite, Texas, that followed Tulsa's lead in the mid to late 2010s. But in the past year, the number of communities that have enacted dispersal ordinances and set other limits on dollar store development has just exploded. I know of at least 3 dozen that have done so just in the past 6 months. And some of the communities are going back and revising their ordinances to increase the distance required from 1 mile to as much as 5 miles. So Councilwoman, go to it if you want to increase that distance from 1 to 2 miles. At least one of them has also broadened its ordinance to include convenience stores and gas stations in addition to small box discount stores. And one community that I know of, Stonecrest, Georgia, which is an Atlanta suburb, has banned dollar stores altogether. You cannot open one in the store. And there's also seems to be a growing trend of communities making dollar stores a conditional use, with conditions including whether the proposed store is likely to have a detrimental impact on the development of full service grocery stores and other stores that offer healthy food. We have a mapping system now for the entire country that shows the location of dollar stores and underlying demographics. And I wanted to show you for Baltimore, here's a map of where dollar stores are in this part of Baltimore. The yellow dots are Dollar Generals, the pink dots are Family Dollar, and the green ones are Dollar Tree. And zooming in for a second on sort of Waverly-ish area and other parts of Baltimore, this shows household income. The darker the blue, the higher the income. And if you look closely at where those dots are, they tend to be in lower and moderate income neighborhoods. You don't see hardly any dots in the dark blue sections. This one is even more shocking. The yellow neighborhoods are ones that are predominantly African-American. And look at where all the dollar stores are. There are almost none in predominantly white neighborhoods. It's a pattern that is chilling to see when you see it mapped out like that. I will stop sharing my screen now and turn things back over to the Senator. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you both so much. There's lots and lots of questions. Thank you for that visual there with for Baltimore. So I'm looking, I'm going to just kick off. Councilor, can you tell us a little more about, and I know you've lived it, so you, in your mind, you went through it, but could you take us step by step? I mean, you started, how did you get to the moratorium, and then how did you actually enact it? Because again, people that are on this are very interested in step by step sort of thing. So exactly how it happened, and then you moved on to the zoning, and just give us take a couple of minutes and take us, through that year.
So we have an authority here. It's called the Tulsa Development Authority, and it is the same as the Urban Renewal Authority. They actually changed the name. So if you're familiar with the urban renewal, I'll call it urban removal, but it was a federal policy that the federal government handed down to address blighted communities. And even though a community may not have been blighted, if it was determined to be by these authorities that are they are a function of the city, they exist to serve the city, then they can create, and they went in and they eminent domain, or they took these properties. And so at that time, there was a store being built, or they were planning to build one. And so before they broke ground and everything, I attended the Tulsa Development Authority, and I would encourage anyone, please, if you have an authority in your community, make sure you attend those meetings, because that's where decisions are being made about land use and the type of businesses that are being allowed to come into your community. And so I attended those meetings, and I saw that it was on one with there was an agenda item about another dollar store. And so I was there, and I raised my hand to speak, because it was in my district, and they acknowledged me. And I asked that board, please do not approve this another dollar store. There's literally a store down the street. I can go out to the street and look down the street and see the other store. I mean, that's how close it was. And I shared that food insecurity is a problem, that this is an issue that I'm working on. Can you please not make the problem worse by passing, agreeing to sell this land to this developer, this land that is now under the authority of the Tulsa Development Authority, for another dollar store. And they voted against me. It was 3-2. It was because it's a 5-member board, and they approved it in my face. And I'm like, wow. So at that point, it was on. It was on for me. I filed a lawsuit. I was upset because, I mean, I'm clearly trying to address an issue in my community. I'm asking the authority to assist with this, and then you just, basically smack me in the face. And so that went through a whole thing. The lawsuit was based on a violation of the Open Meetings Act, because I didn't believe that it was properly notified and gave the citizens of Tulsa proper notice to be able to come and have their voice be heard. That went all the way through. I lost at the local level, went to the appeals level, won that, and then it went to the Supreme, and they voted that that they did give enough notice. I still think they didn't. I think that's still a part of the system, right? To the point that, how are we going to address this? Well, we don't want, I'm a conspiracy theorist to a large degree, so I don't want to. I do believe in my attorney, and I talked to other attorneys. I do believe that we were right in that they did not provide proper notice, and that my request was that they reverse that decision because they did not give proper notice. They didn't. The court, the final ruling, it was that they felt like they did. So at any rate, that was one fight. The other fight was when they went ahead and passed it and said, okay, we're going to go ahead and approve this development. I protested. We protested. So when you see pictures, if you Google Tulsa as it relates to this, you'll see videos and all that kind of stuff where the community was out protesting all the way through the building of the store up into when they actually opened the store. And after, we protested for several months after the store was actually even open. And that is the only dollar store of all the ones that's in my community that actually have healthy options. They have some fruit and vegetables. They suck. They're horrible. They're not, these stores are not grocery stores. And so they're not designed, and they don't have the operation and the expertise to actually provide healthy options, and that, to rotate those vegetables out. So that was just a way in which to get us off their sidewalk, because we was literally out front in front of the sidewalk protesting. That didn't matter, but the store was open. And so I focused my attention on getting the grocery store in, and hopefully that's one of the stores I hope will close, since we now have a grocery store with healthy options in the community. But that's kind of how we came up to this. Again, I knew from the beginning we needed to put a policy in place so that policy would impact for the long term this issue of the proliferation of dollar stores. And so I went to, as I said before, I went to the legal department, I went to planning and said, hey, this is what this community in California did. Why can't we tweak it and use this same strategy to address this issue? I got a lot of pushback on that. But I stayed with it. I had to do a lot of their research myself, because when I asked the legal department to do it, he said, oh, well, I couldn't find anything. I said, oh, really? I said, well, I did. I found a lot. And I brought that up, and I continued to push to address this issue. And that's kind of how it happened. And I think, as Kennedy indicated, there are cities all over the country that's duplicating in some regard this process and using policy, the planning. What we have an INCOG, and most communities do, and addressing it from that level, attacking it from that point, saying, no, we're not going to address, we're going to put this policy in place to keep this from getting to the point of the situation like you explained in your hometown. And so again, policy is the way to do it. The framework has been set, the example is there. There's so much assistance you can get from the Institute of Local Self-Reliance, regardless of what city or community you live in. And I encourage you to press your elected officials to do it because they may not be aware. Share that information, print it all off. That's why I love that their website, because you can literally go in there and click it and print it off PDF and have everything you need at a hand. And you can turn that and you can take that to your elected officials to do their job as far as I'm concerned. And that is to protect the interests of the people.
Well, thank you. And that's a nice transition about interest. So Nick has a question, and maybe Kennedy can address if she's seen this. Are these ordinances defended against lawsuits, or how are they defended against lawsuits claiming restraint of commerce?
You know, I've never seen a lawsuit like that yet. I mean, I'm sure it might happen at some point. Happening, but I think again, if you're framing the issue in terms of one, providing healthy food, which is a fundamental human right, and two, encouraging free commerce and free trade, and in that regard, not letting a monopoly industry take over a neighborhood, I think you're on solid legal footing. So we'll see what happens if a case is ever brought.
Mm-hmm. And just to clarify, so you're saying that it's because these ordinances aren't against a particular vendor, it's the type, it's describing the type of situation that you want created within a particular area, and that's within the domain of
right.
Is that
yeah,
correct?
That's correct. That's correct. Of course, there's another sort of a parallel corollary piece to this too, which again, Tulsa and Councilor Hall-Harper have addressed, which is what do you then do to create the food options that you want? Because often there's just a vacuum where there aren't stores at all. And that's where there has to be some work done in the community towards encouraging and supporting entrepreneurship and providing financial incentives and tools. And I think it's worth providing community investment, hard dollars, to subsidize development of grocery stores to make sure everybody has healthy food options. And in fact, there are a lot of communities that are looking at using some of their American Rescue Plan Act money to invest in grocery store development. I know that's happening right now in Charleston, West Virginia, Phoenix, Jacksonville, Toledo, where city councils are considering putting money into grocery store development.
Mm-hmm. And so, Councilwoman, you did answer the question a little bit, but about the moratorium. And so you put in the moratorium, and it was a 6-month. Was there a study? Was there something that happened during this period?
Yes, absolutely. So during that time, the moratorium was key because it stopped actually the proliferation, because there was another store down in the pipeline. Even when I was fighting against the one, there was another one coming, or at least trying to come. And so that was key to stop that spread, as I call it. But then what are we going to do in that 6-month time, that moratorium time space? Because the moratoriums have to have a beginning and an end. And so the council agreed to the 6 months. That was difficult. It was fight, but we got it. And so my goal was to do something within that 6 months, policy-wise, to permanently address the problem. And so that's what we did. And so that's when I started the research, and again came upon the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. Moratorium was just because of my background in government, was a term that I knew in a way of which to address an issue governmentally, as it relates to a government, to address the problem. So that's why I said I'm gonna do a moratorium. I'm gonna try to get this moratorium in place and give us time to address this issue. And so that's how that came about. And once we got the Healthy Neighborhoods overlay passed, the moratorium sunsetted because we no longer needed it. We addressed the problem with the policy, the Healthy Neighborhoods overlay policy. And I'll just reiterate what Kennedy said as far as the lawsuits were concerned. Every city, whether it's the city level, county level, state, federal, it does not matter. When it comes to government, there is a mandate to the function of government is to provide and protect the health, the well-being, sustainability, et cetera, of society, of your community. And so, like she said, standing on that in any lawsuit, I did find one lawsuit though, that it was litigated in California about a policy or a similar policy. But again, the government won again for that reason. The business interests came out and tried to fight and say, okay, well, this is unfair to businesses or whatever. I don't even remember what their standing was, because it wasn't any standing at all. But they won because the court found that the government has within their authority to put policies in place to protect citizens. At the end of the day, you're not going to get around that. And so I think, because our law department, our legal department in the city was trying to say, well, we may get sued, we may get sued. And I said, even if we do, this is something it's worthy of going to court for. But there is case law, not in the state of Oklahoma, but there was case law that said in these similar situations, because that's what you then do, you go to look at similar situations, similar cases, and that set precedent. And that precedent has been set that we do, in fact, governmental entities have the authority to do these types of policies.
The questions are starting to come. It's good. People are thinking. So Donzel, did you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to give Ms. Sonia Merchant Jones an opportunity to ask you a question, if she can. I know where she lives. She lives in between $2 stores right now, and she represents the Better Waverly Community Association.
Is that what she wanted to do? Or? Oh, there you go. You turn on your camera, Miss.
I did it all.
There you are.
You know, I just really want to know if it is a matter of affordability. Is it a matter of preference? Of course, the proliferation, I'm so totally against, but could it be that it is a matter of affordability and preference by some low to moderate income families in certain communities? That's pretty much my question.
Thank you. She wants to, know, is it just a preference?
In my community, I don't think that was the case, and because that came up. Well, the citizens they're shopping there. Well, they don't have any other options. That's literally the only stores we had, and so you can't say that they're choosing to shop there when they don't have another option. You have to have the option and then see, right?
Well, in my community, there are several options, and I hear a lot of the times that certain chain stores are too high to afford some of the things. And some dollar stores, they do have very limited healthy options. They don't have any fresh food that I've ever seen. So I understand where you're coming from. But here in Baltimore, at least in my surrounding community, we have a lot of chain store supermarkets. And yet I hear that some of our neighbors find that they're too high to purchase. But I understand Oklahoma may be different. Alabama, I heard, Georgia. But here in Baltimore, Maryland, we do. And there's some neighborhoods that have that are food deserts, that really are food deserts, where those stores are options, but people are not complaining about that. So that's pretty much what I'm looking at.
So I think it really depends on the neighborhood and the makeup. But for me, I just want a balance. Like I said, I love it.
I love what you're saying.
Yeah, it's about balance. And we were totally out of balance because I didn't have a single grocery store in my district. And so it depends on the neighborhood. And I think even with communities that have groceries and healthy food options, again, just make sure you allow that balance, because Kennedy's point, it not only affects the grocery option as we're talking about healthy food options, but there's other stores that these dollar stores will impact, not just grocery stores negatively impact. And they will impact the mom and pops, right? And so again, to her point, those profit shares go out of your community. When you have a locally owned and operated store, those proceeds will stay in your community.
I mean, what you said, I just want to make one more point. What's being said makes a lot of sense, but also keep in mind that, some people, they don't want healthy options. They don't eat vegetables. And, you hear it all. I've worked in public housing for many, many years. And so, and even around and being in different communities here in the city. And, some people don't want that and don't want to be forced to do it. I just think the proliferation and the mismanagement of stores is other things that we need to consider in this conversation. And it's wonderful that we're having it. Thank you, Senator Washington.
Yeah, thank you. And I think Kennedy wants to say something, because I think I want to build on your question about the fact that in particular in this one location where there's a giant grocery store, there's an Ace hardware store, there's a whole bunch. So we have those options, right? So Kennedy, could you talk about what you've seen? I think you mentioned in your report what actually happens to surrounding businesses that will reduce options further. And also, I think you talked about how dollar stores have actually raised their prices once they became the only business in town. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, dollar stores do a lot of tricky things, and I think people don't really recognize what they're doing. Like, one of the things that they'll do is, so you say, okay, I can get this bag of, Fritos for $1 at the dollar store. It's going to cost me $1.15 at the grocery store. People don't realize that the bag of Fritos at the dollar store is 2 ounces less than the one at the grocery store. They actually produce different sizes of products so that they can make them seem like you're getting a bargain, when in reality you're not. You're being cheated on the quantity of stuff that you get. They also, the bulk of what dollar stores sell is stuff that they've bought because it's an odd lot. It's damaged merchandise, or it's older merchandise, or it's dented cans or whatever. And so they're able to buy it at a lower price than the grocery store can. The price issue is certainly a tough one. And just a couple of weeks ago, I read this just sort of heartbreaking article about a family somewhere that was, very poor. They were out of work, and they were trying to stretch their food dollars as much as they could. And they wanted their kids to eat healthy food. But when they would buy the kids fresh vegetables, like Brussels sprouts, the kids won't eat them. And so they're like, we just need to get calories in these kids so they're not starving to death. And if what they're going to eat is the Fritos, we're going to, instead of wasting the food and wasting the money, we're going to go buy the Fritos. And we know it's bad for them, but we don't have any other choices. So it's a really critical public health issue that communities need to address. And dollar stores will trick you. They trick consumers into thinking that they're getting bargains, and in reality, they're getting poor value.
So it looks, Councilor, you want to say something, but we have a couple. I have a Cross, he wants to be able to ask something. And also we have our Councilwoman, which I hope when the time comes, she'll come on camera to ask her question, but go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to also piggyback on what Kennedy said, as far as that example with families who children don't want to eat and refuse to eat those healthy options. I think it's key, because I come from a public health background. I worked in public health for over 25 years. Partnering with your local health departments and agencies to address that problem, right? To have the kitchens, the community kitchens, where you can bring families in and teach them how to eat and to prepare healthy food options in such a way that the children will eat them. And so that's a way, just to keep in mind, that's a way to try to address that, because that is an issue. If the children have never had these healthy options because they've grown up in a community where they were just not there, then you're going to have to do more than just providing them. You're going to have to help them and teach them and make sure these subjects are taught in school, why these are healthy options, what are correct proportions and all those, if we're going to really change. Because I would venture to say that the life expectancy gap exists not just in Tulsa, but in any community throughout this country where there's polarization and you have Black, brown, and poor communities in one community, and affluent white communities, which we know exist because our government set it up that way, in other communities. And so bring in other people. It's just not municipal. It's not going to be just the policy. There are other things that have to work to address that entire circle of creating healthy lifestyles in communities.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I really love about the Oasis Fresh Market that you have there in North Tulsa now, is that it works in partnership with a nonprofit that does provide community education. It does training programs and classes and teaches kids about food and nutrition and how to grow food. And so it really is like a wraparound service for the entire community. And I love that about it. It's such a great model.
My Councilwoman, Odette Ramos is here. So Councilwoman, please join the conversation and feel free even after the question to stay on. So, but you can put your question.
I appreciate that. First of all, Senator, thank you for having this conversation and really digging deep in this issue. I really appreciate it. Obviously, the dollar store we're kind of talking about is in my district, but I know along your district, along one particular corridor, there's an inflow, like too many. So this is a big issue, and I do appreciate you digging through and making time for us. And of course, Ms. Smith and Councilwoman Hall-Harper, always really just an honor to be here with you. And also thank you so much for taking the time with us. My question had to do with the overlay that you talked about. We are thinking about trying to address this issue in two ways. One is we have urban renewal plans in some parts of our city where we can amend them to just take out dollar stores. The other is to actually do an overlay for the city to allow so that it is applied across the city and not just in certain areas, right? So how did you formulate this? You didn't just say dollar stores. You said, I think I would just want to sort of get what that definition is, because for instance, we have an overlay, we have a use in C1 zoning that is prohibited, which is big box stores. And the definition is a store that's over, 75,000 square feet. So what I'm trying to get at is what is that definition that has passed muster in order to be able to create this new zoning overlay to basically be able to save our main streets. I mean, what we have now is a dollar store going into our main street. We didn't have a process like you had described with the redevelopment authority. This was done private transaction, and there was a totally a roundabout way that we found out about it. So, so we're trying to make it so that it would be something that the public has to have some say on. So anyway, what is that definition so that we can use that in the overlay?
So it was similar. The term is small box store that we used in our policy, and I'm trying to look it up right now. But I will say that it is on the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, the actual definition. It just like you said, it has within the definition, it has the limited amount as far as the square feet. It also includes in its definition the types of products, because we had to be very particular, because we did not want to include gas stations, right? Because by some of the definitions, so we had to make sure that as we were developing what that definition is, and again, I would just refer you to the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, that website. They have the policies in full. They have the entire signed PDF copies. And so you can basically cut and paste and use those definitions for the purposes that you're indicating, because it is important. You want to make sure, it's very important that you want to make sure you're including the stores that you want to limit and not exclude others. And so that definition we've spent a lot of time on setting that up and making sure that we didn't impact stores that we didn't intend to. Shoe stores, right? If you have a shoe store, that's what I'm working on now. We need a shoe store, but we wanted to make sure that we didn't exclude that type of store. So again, I don't have the full definition, but it does have several parts to that, and that's on the website. I'd certainly encourage you to take a look at that.
And I appreciate that. I'll definitely take a look. We have in my district it's a little interesting because down the street, we actually have a discount goods store. It's family owned. That's what we want, right? That's what we want. And it is 20,000 square feet. So I'm just trying to figure out how to do this. So I really appreciate it. I will certainly look up more information on the website. Thank you.
Yeah, our grocery store is about 1,700 square feet, but it also has in there so many square feet in a store that is dedicated to healthy food options, fruits and vegetables. So that's a part of that definition as well. So you can make that definition very specific to make sure you're addressing the stores that you want to address and excluding those types of stores that you want to exclude. But that's a part of.
There's also dollar amounts, right?
Dollar amounts, that's in ours too. $10 or less. Yeah.
It wouldn't necessarily affect existing. This would be about new permits, right? So if something is already there, it wouldn't necessarily impact. We, again, Councilwoman, please stay on. Kelly Cross, you wanted to ask, I think I was going to allow him to do it orally. He's being shy. He doesn't want to be on the camera, but you can let him ask the question. So Donzel, let Mr. Cross become a panelist so he can ask a question. And while he's coming on, I did want to ask a little bit for, you went really fast, Kennedy, with about, creating food deserts, and you talked about robberies. Could you just talk a little bit more about sort of the conditions around it, and that it's not just in cities, that this is a phenomenon everywhere. So you talk a little bit more about, how would a store create a food desert, and then how would it, how is it the owner's fault that they get robbed?
You mean the dollar store's fault? Well, these are everywhere. They're absolutely everywhere, and the issues are, the way that it plays out is slightly different in rural areas than it is in urban areas, but the differences are fairly minor. They create food deserts in, like the example that I showed. They literally put grocery stores out of business if there are too many of them. I was talking to a small town grocer who's about to close. He's looking for a buyer for his store because he said that when the Dollar General opened in town, this is a town of about 3,500 people, he lost $1,000 a day in sales. And after 6 months, he just couldn't afford it anymore. And that $1,000, it's going to the Dollar General, it is buying junk food. You just feel for them. And because their business model is, not just to maximize sales, but also to really minimize costs, expenses. They really do operate on a shoestring budget. They do not pay staff well. They make them work overtime, but they don't pay them for overtime. And the crime issue is a serious one. I know of several reporters who are working on stories about that right now nationally, and there've been a few that'll come out because they're so thinly staffed that staff simply can't monitor everything and control it. So you can just imagine when you have a store that comes in that's generating some dangerous traffic because they have these big 18-wheelers that they want to bring in to load and unload into a neighborhood, into that kind of scale. When you have crime, when you have all these things kind of piling up, it just diminishes the entire neighborhood. It brings property values down, and it makes the entire neighborhood less appealing for other people to open businesses.
Thank you. Mr. Cross, he's the president of our Old Goucher Community Association. This is nice. I'm not here just by myself. I've got all my friends here. Go ahead with your question and comment, I think you had. And we're also joined by Councilman Mark Conway. So.
Thank you, Senator Washington, for hosting this. I think this is a great event. And I really appreciated Councilor Hall-Harper's take on what was done in Tulsa. Just a couple of questions around that. I'm curious about some of the specifics around the incentives that were provided to grocery stores to come in with fresh foods. I know some of the research we've done in trying to attract grocery stores to our part of the city has revealed that grocery stores are in a lot of ways, very low margin businesses. They require a lot of high volume traffic, a lot of people coming through. And particularly when you start getting into the fresh food, fresh produce piece, there's a lot of spoilage with that. It's just much easier, and the profit margins are much higher when you have shelf stable items that can sit on a shelf for years on end. There's a lot more profit margin to be had. How do you all overcome that in terms of helping to incentivize that fresh foods can be, on the there at the stores as opposed to just the canned foods?
How do we incentivize healthy options?
Yes. What were some of the specifics around incentivizing healthy options, particularly because, as I was saying, the dollar stores they've got the advantage of being able to just sell canned foods that don't have, aren't perishable. So they don't have that loss that they're continually incurring as grocery stores are trying to sell fresh foods do.
Yeah, Councilwoman, you said something about decreasing the parking requirements.
Yes. So that's as it relates to development. and bringing those stores in, not necessarily specific to the healthy options, but more so you got to get a grocery store committed to come in and do business and set up business and build if they're not, going into an existing building. But in building code, depending on the square footage and the type of business you're opening, that is what dictates or determines the size of a parking lot. Parking lots are one of the largest, oddly enough, one of the largest expenses when you're talking about development. And so what we were able to do in our Healthy Neighborhoods overlay was to allow for the reduction of the standard or the norm when it comes to parking lots, so that it would decrease their development costs to bring them in to incent for this, again, for a grocery store. That's not the case in any and all types of businesses, but for grocery stores. Because by their nature, you go into the grocery store, you're coming in and out, in and out, in and out. And so if you go to any grocery store, most grocery stores, the only time I've ever seen in the more affluent grocery stores where the parking lot is totally packed out is during Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's, that type of thing. But the rest of the year, because people are going in and coming out, that's just the nature of a grocery store. And you don't need a large grocery store parking lot that was required, or that is in our case, maybe in other communities, I don't know. More populated cities may have done it differently, but for us in our community, it just wasn't needed. And so that was an incentive for a grocer to consider to come in and say, okay, we're gonna save some money on this development because we don't have to build the grocery store, the parking lot as huge or as large. So that was the incentive in that regard.
Kennedy, and also part of the conditions weren't just healthy foods. So that was one. So in some areas there are healthy food options. Or are there other some considerations like economic diversity? Like, are there other things that are put into some of these ordinances that aren't just about healthy foods?
Yeah, yes, certainly. But I wanted to first say something to Kelly's question. This is not necessarily related to the dollar store issue in particular, but I've seen some pretty innovative grocery store developments in recent years, including some in the New York area, and there's a bunch of them in England now, where they're developing grocery stores that have greenhouses on the roof. And so you go in and you want fresh produce, and they literally pick it for you right then. I mean, and that's how they kind of get around the spoilage issue, and they have a steady supply. We could so easily do that. In the U.S., we could do it more often. I think they're great solutions to problems like that.
Wow, that's really cool. That's very innovative. Councilman Conway, you're on. Did you want to add to the discussion? You have more than a few dollar stores in your so so both Councilwoman Ramos and Councilman Conway, and I represent both of them as their senator of this stretch that you saw that's quite literally in the middle of the city. So go ahead, Mr. Conway.
Yeah, I just want to first say thank you, Senator Washington, for really diving into this issue and putting attention to it. I can tell you in my learnings of the district, the frustration about the dollar stores it's really been frustrating. When I ran, I remember one of the things that happened in the course of my race was we went from having just one grocery store to 0 grocery stores. We had at one point 3 grocery stores in the district. Eventually they all shut down, and now we have $3 stores in the district. And we have since opened a new grocery store, but the major corridor within my district along York Road now has $3 stores that are a rock's throw from each other. And they're really beginning to choke out a lot of the other businesses, and especially the prospects of grocery store in our district. They've taken up the largest spaces in our district, and it's really become a problem for the overall sustainability of the corridor. So I also want to tip my cap to Councilwoman Hall-Harper for the great work that you've done in Tulsa. We've been trying to think of creative ways to get this done, and I'm glad that Senator Washington found you and the work you've been doing. Because it's really been frustrating, and I think for all the work that we put into improving our corridors, to making our neighborhood stronger, and to meeting the health and food and other needs of our communities, to have dollar stores come in and just really not care, I think has really been frustrating. So I really just appreciate the conversation. Looking forward to this legislation moving forward at the state level, but even more, better understanding what we can be doing at the council level to assist in that endeavor. So just want to tip my cap and thank you both to the great work you're doing.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. Another question I have here is someone really wants to focus on, they're critiquing in some ways this whole movement, saying, well, it's really about, it's not, I guess, being critical enough. And it's just critiquing dollar stores and not talking about broader ways in which developers and landowners can be held accountable. In other words, it's responding to the feeling that, hey, I own the property, I should have the right to do what I want with it. If I'm taking a risk, if somebody else wanted to be here, they would be here. So their question is, what can be done to maximize community wealth and well-being, to incentivize Black and Brown ownership? And some examples are their community land trusts, or the co-ops, or the incubators, union shop. What are some things that you're seeing? Because you look at it as a whole, you're looking at the country in terms of sustainability. And then also I'll have the councilwoman ask what is she doing in her area. But I wanted, Kennedy, if you could sort of address that broader issue of community wealth and well-being.
Right. Well, there's actually a lot happening, and you mentioned community land trust, and that is something, again, I'm seeing communities use some of their American Rescue Plan Act money to buy buildings, commercial buildings that are in pivotal locations, and turn them over to a community land trust. Most land trusts in the country have focused mostly on housing affordability and on residential property, but with the pandemic, a growing number of them are pivoting and also encompassing commercial property. I've seen that now in Minneapolis, St. Paul. I've seen it in Oakland, California, Philadelphia, just growing number of places that are doing that. Because if they have control of the land and the property, then they have control of what the tenancy is going to be, and they can provide affordable operating space for businesses that are high priority businesses for the community. Dollar store proliferation and chain store proliferation are kind of the same issue in some ways. And if you have, if a neighborhood commercial district is overrun with any kind of chains, you're simply not building community wealth. Entrepreneurship and business ownership is one of the best paths to building family wealth in the country. And we need to do everything we can to increase opportunities for that to happen, which includes investing in entrepreneurial training programs, working with existing businesses to help them keep their business skills frosty and innovative, and really promoting the innovation that happens in locally owned businesses. That's where real innovation occurs. I tell people all the time, remember that even Walmart started out as a family-owned store on a main street in a small town, and it grew because they were clever. That's where innovation happens, and we need to really be fostering that. Community land trusts are great. Wraparound sort of community entrepreneurship skills are important. We used to, when I was in high school, we had an actual high school curriculum called distributive education, where you could learn to be a retailer. They taught you how to do it. We have phased that out of schools. It doesn't exist anymore, but I wish it did. Wish we could put it back in.
Great. Councilwoman.
Yes, I will say that first, the comment about, I have, and I agree, all things being considered, I agree that if you own the land, you should be able to do what you want to do with that land. However, there are always going to be restrictions on what you can do, particularly when it is when you choose to do it. If it impacts the community adversely, then government has the responsibility, not only the authority, but a responsibility to come in and say no. And so that's what we're talking about. All things being considered, 10 years ago, we didn't have a problem when the first or even the second dollar store came in. The problem is that that's all we're seeing. And that has an adverse impact on people day to day. And so, yes, there is something that must be done about it. As far as those tools that Kennedy just mentioned, we are literally going through that right now. We are looking at establishing land trust. and other tools. I'm listening and researching and trying to find all the other tools that build wealth, particularly with entrepreneurship. My district houses Black Wall Street, Greenwood. And so entrepreneurship is near and dear to my heart and to the heart of my community. And so that's why we created a chamber. When you mentioned the Power Group, that is an investment arm of the power of the chamber, encouraging individuals to give so that we can buy land and build those things that we want to see and what we need in our community. Because as long as we're letting the market dictate, right, those people and businesses who have the resources, their main concern is not what's best for the community, but what's going to turn a buck. That's their first priority. And we don't need people making those decisions in our communities whose primary concern or only concern is what's going to turn a buck, what's going to make a profit for me. Going back to my term that I used consistently in this fight, you're putting profits over people. And that is what government is supposed to stand in and run interference when that happens. And so that's what this movement is about. It's not about trying to control someone. They own the land, they should do what they want. But again, if what you're doing is having a detrimental impact in the studies, the statistics, all of that's out there. We have life expectancy gaps. You live in this community, you can expect to die 14 years earlier. I mean, that government exists to address those issues, to address those concerns. And so I can respect what he is saying as far as that is concerned, but at the same time, when the proof is there that it is unhealthy and people are not thriving, people are not building wealth, that it's power structures and corporations that are making those decisions for us on a day-to-day, then no, that there's a problem there. And I, for one, will fight tooth and nail to keep that from happening.
Well, I see.
But as far as,
Senator, Senator, I'm sorry. Do you want to go over what the current conditions are in Baltimore and what the next steps may be for the community and the attendees?
Right. So I thank you so much for that. I think we have a couple more minutes. I could do that, or 3 more minutes. Is a great conversation, but thanks for trying to keep me on track. But I just got 1 or 2 more, and I think Kennedy wanted to say something, and then there was 1 more question, and absolutely we'll transition out.
Yeah, I was going to say, just in terms of the tools that you need to, to kind of create the business environment that you want, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the importance of flexible financing, especially when you're looking at communities that have been, disinvested for a long time and may not have the generational wealth that they need to put money into starting a business. So it's crucial to have, whether it's through grant assistance or flexible underwriting criteria or crowdfunding, whatever it might be, it's really important to develop the entrepreneurial skill and also have the financial resources to put entrepreneurs in business. Revolving loan funds can do that well. There are lots of financial tools out there that communities can use if they develop them themselves, but they have to develop them. No one's going to hand them to them. So we've got to create them ourselves.
Absolutely. Thank you. And then 1 more.
I'll say we have a revolving loan fund program in the city of Tulsa. That is focused on incenting business and entrepreneurship. So to her point, absolutely develop those things. If you don't, go to your elected officials and say, hey, these cities are using this. We need to think about this to spur that entrepreneurship and build wealth. And
then finally, Councilwoman, probably you would be best for this. There's the organizing piece, and there's the piece where it said, well, look, there's so many problems in the city. We've got challenges with education. We've got challenges. We're in COVID. We have issues with public safety, and there's bigger issues. Can you talk about the neighborhood and community organizing piece where does this fit, and how do you respond to, this is something that, is discretionary in terms of your focus? And I don't know, I think you have gotten that critique on Facebook, and the other councilwoman said she has as well, but we could wrap up with that way of organizing and reaching people and responding to that.
Yes, absolutely. That's just a tool. And I certainly noticed those, but that's just a tool to distract, to say, oh, well, what about this? I say, well, yeah, my response is that's an issue, but what I'm talking about right now is this, and I'm going to stay focused on this. In government, unfortunately, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. And so what I would say, if this is an issue and a concern from a community level standpoint, because I don't consider myself a politician, I consider myself a community activist who happen to have won an election. And so get your organized, galvanize, and do a letter writing campaign, protest. They call me the protest queen. I get some signs made and stand out on the corner for years, and we did on another issue in order to, until the city heard the cries of the community, and then they addressed it. And so if it takes that, then that's what you have to be willing to do. I would say organize, be diplomatic initially, but then when you get the door shut in your face, then you take it to the next level. And that's what I did with Dollar General. When they came, I called Dollar General. I sent a letter, I engaged them. I said, hey, this is a problem I'm experiencing in my community. Do you want to help me with it? They didn't even respond to me. Now, after I started raising hell and protesting and called the news out, then I started getting emails back, oddly enough. But that's unfortunately the way of the world. That's for the most part how corporate companies are going to respond to the little man. And so protest, go to your elected officials, your city councilors, your county commissioners, whoever, the state, and say, look, this is a problem and we demand that it be addressed. Do some research, Institute for Local Self-Reliance, find out best practices and what other communities have done, develop a plan, and demand that your elected officials implement that plan, because that is their job. They're responsible for doing that. And so you set the priority. The citizens are who set priorities, not the elected officials. And so I try to engage at every turn to do that. What's important to you? And that's why I chose food insecurity. When I talk to constituents, what is your problem? I can't shop in my community. That's my problem. And that's why I started taking on the food insecurity issue.
And then also you do, as an elected official, we do multiple things. I mean, you're also doing zoning, and you're doing school reform, and you're doing many, many things at the same time. Even if something might be your keystone issue, but you're also handling all those other things. Listen, we're going to just really quickly just wrap up maybe what we learned, and that's what Donzel. So Savitra, if you could pull that screen up. And again, in closing, I just want to thank everybody for joining us. Thank our guest speakers for sharing your knowledge and experiences. So it's on the one hand, so there's this juxtaposition, it seems like, with these dollar stores. Look, the good news is, they're affordable on the face. They're fast growing, so they're accessible. So there'll be lots and lots of them. But it sounds like we heard that there's not so good news, that they can cause economic stress, not just simply react to it, which is the narrative that is given very often, that this is a depressed area. That's why it goes in. You've provided some compelling evidence that there can be causal relationships, that there's decline in employment opportunities, that these stores hire just one or two people. They're not hiring tens of people to come in and stock the shelves, that they can hurt local business, that the food is low quality. And frankly, this final point of there's an illusion of a discount, because a pound is not a pound of coffee in one of these stores. So again, I'd like to, if you'd like to follow this issue in the 43rd district or around Baltimore City, please, one other thing we learned, I think there's another screen, about the concentration in areas, that there's demographics associated. And I think we saw that in our a little map of Baltimore as well, that there's a racial and class component of this. Next slide. Again, in the DC area, you see very much the same thing. Next slide. So if you want to follow this issue, if you want to get more information, if we weren't able to answer one of your questions, please feel free to email me. We'll also send you the contact information of our two panelists. We're developing a network of people that are across the country, so that are interested in this, and so who will be fellow travelers. And if you want to speak with them, so just please, just stay safe, stay healthy, stay connected, have a great evening, wear your mask, wash your hands, and love each other. Good day. So we will end. So thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks
you
so much.
Thank you so much, both of you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we are stopping recording, right?